The air was thick with anticipation, a palpable electricity that seemed to crackle between the 9 figures gathered at the edge of the dense, snow-draped forest. The Ural Mountains loomed ahead, their jagged peaks piercing the heavens like the teeth of some ancient, slumbering beast. The group stood in silence, their breath visible in the frigid air, each lost in their own thoughts, yet bound together by a shared sense of purpose. They were not merely hikers, they were adventurers, seekers of the unknown, drawn to the wild and untamed beauty of the Russian wilderness. And at the heart of this band of explorers was Igor Dyatlov, a man whose very presence seemed to command the respect and admiration of those around him. Igor was a seasoned mountaineer, his face weathered by years of exposure to the elements, his eyes sharp and calculating, always scanning the horizon for the next challenge. He was the undisputed leader of the group, a role he had earned through countless expeditions and near-death experiences. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and measured, yet carried an undercurrent of authority that left no room for dissent. "This is it," he said, his gaze sweeping over the group. "The journey we've been preparing for. The Ural Mountains are unforgiving, but we are ready. We are strong, and we will conquer them." The others nodded, their faces a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Zenaida Kolmogorova, a close friend of Igor's, stepped forward, her eyes sparkling with a fierce determination. She was the heart of the group, the one who always managed to lift their spirits with her infectious enthusiasm. "We've trained for this," she said, her voice steady. "We've faced worse. This is just another mountain, another challenge, and we'll face it together." Yuri Doroshenko, the group's resident optimist, clapped a hand on Igor's shoulder, his grin wide and reassuring. "And when we come back, we'll have stories to tell that will make everyone back home green with envy," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. Yuri was the kind of person who could find the silver lining in any situation, and his presence was a constant source of comfort to the others. Ludmila Dubinina, tall and lean with a quiet strength that belied her slender frame, stood slightly apart from the group, her arms crossed over her chest. She was the most reserved of the group, but also the most resourceful. When others faltered, Ludmila was the one who found a way forward. She met Igor's gaze and gave a small nod, her expression one of quiet confidence. "We're ready," she said, simply. Rustem Slobodin, the group's philosopher, leaned against a tree, his eyes distant as he contemplated the journey ahead. He was the thinker, the one who always seemed to be lost in his own world, yet his insights were often the most profound. "The mountains are more than just rock and ice," he said, his voice soft but filled with conviction. "They are a test of our will, our spirit. They will show us who we truly are." Nicolai Thibaut Brignoli, the most adventurous of the group, was already pacing restlessly, his energy barely contained. He was the one who had pushed for this expedition, his love for exploration and discovery driving him ever forward. "Let's not waste any more time," he said, his voice eager. "The mountains are calling, and I for one am ready to answer." Alexander Kolobatov, the quietest member of the group, stood slightly apart, his sharp eyes taking in every detail of their surroundings. He was the problem solver, the one who could always be relied upon to find a solution when things went wrong. He didn't speak often, but when he did, his words carried weight. "We should move soon," he said, his voice low. "The weather is unpredictable and we need to make the most of the daylight." Yuri Krivoninchenko, the youngest of the group, was practically bouncing with excitement. He was the joker, the one who could always be counted on to lighten the mood with his quick wit and infectious laughter. "I can't wait to see the looks on everyone's faces when we come back with stories of our adventure," he said, his eyes shining with anticipation. And then there was Semyon Zolotaryov, the oldest member of the group, a man with a mysterious past and a quiet, almost unsettling presence. He was the most experienced hiker among them, his knowledge of the mountains unparalleled. Yet there was something about him that made the others uneasy, a sense that he was holding something back, some secret that he carried with him like a shadow. He stood slightly apart from the group, his eyes fixed on the distant peaks, his expression unreadable. "The mountains are not to be underestimated," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "They have a way of revealing the truth, whether we are ready for it or not." With their packs secured and their resolve steeled, the group set off into the wilderness, their boots crunching against the snow-covered ground. The forest was eerily silent, the only sound the soft whisper of the wind through the trees. As they walked, the trees began to thin, giving way to the vast, open expanse of the Ural Mountains. The air grew colder, the wind biting at their exposed skin, but they pressed on, their determination unwavering. The first few days of the expedition passed without incident. The group made good progress, their spirits high as they navigated the rugged terrain. They took turns leading the way, each member of the group contributing their unique skills and strengths. Igor was a natural leader, his calm and steady presence a source of reassurance to the others. Zenaida's enthusiasm was infectious, her laughter ringing out across the mountainside as they made camp each night. Yuri Doroshenko kept their spirits up with his endless jokes and stories, while Ludmila's quiet strength and resourcefulness ensured that they were always prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. But as they ventured deeper into the mountains, the mood began to shift. The weather grew more unpredictable, the wind howling through the peaks like a mournful wail. The snow fell heavier, obscuring their vision and making the terrain more treacherous. And then, there were the sounds. Strange, unearthly noises that seemed to echo through the valleys, sending shivers down their spines. At first they tried to brush it off, attributing the sounds to the wind or the shifting of the ice. But as the days passed, the noises grew louder, more persistent, and harder to ignore. One night, as they sat around the campfire, the group fell into an uneasy silence. The fire crackled and popped, casting flickering shadows across their faces. Semyon Zolotaryov sat apart from the others, his eyes fixed on the flames, his expression unreadable. "Did you hear that?" Yuri Krivonishenko asked suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. The others turned to him, their faces pale in the firelight. "Hear what?" Zinaida asked, her voice trembling slightly. Yuri shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. "I don't know, it sounded like a scream," he said, his voice barely audible. The group fell silent, their eyes darting nervously around the camp, and then, from somewhere in the distance, came a sound that made their blood run cold. A low, guttural growl, unlike anything they had ever heard before. Igor stood up, his face grim. "We need to stay calm," he said, his voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at the edges of his mind. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something or someone was out there waiting for them in the darkness. The next morning, the group packed up their camp in silence, the events of the previous night weighing heavily on their minds. The weather had taken a turn for the worse, the sky a dull leaden gray, the snow falling in thick, heavy flakes. As they trudged through the snow, the sense of unease grew stronger, and the strange noises from the night before still echoing in their minds. And then, as they reached the base of Kholatsi Khark, the mountain of the dead, they saw it. A strange orange light flickering in the distance just beyond the tree line. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before, a pulsating glow that seemed to defy explanation. The group stopped in their tracks, their eyes fixed on the light, their hearts pounding in their chests. "What is that?" Zenaida whispered, her voice trembling with fear. No one answered. They stood there, frozen in place, as the light grew brighter, more intense, and then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone, leaving them in darkness once more. The group exchanged uneasy glances, the unspoken question hanging in the air between them. What had they just witnessed? And more importantly, what did it mean for their expedition? Igor took a deep breath, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of what they had seen. "We need to keep moving," he said finally, his voice firm. "We can't let this distract us. We have a mission to complete." But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were no longer alone, that something, or someone, was out there, watching them, waiting for them. And as they continued their journey, the sense of dread grew stronger, the shadows closing in around them, the mountains themselves seeming to conspire against them. The Dyatlov Pass was no longer just a challenge to be conquered. It was a mystery, a riddle wrapped in ice and snow, and the answers they sought might come at a price they were not prepared to pay.
The wind howled like a banshee, its icy fingers clawing at the flimsy fabric of the tent as if desperate to tear it apart. Inside, the 9 hikers huddled together, their breath visible in the frigid air, their faces pale and drawn. The temperature had plummeted to a bone-chilling 30 degrees Celsius, and the snow outside was falling in thick, relentless sheets, obscuring the world beyond the thin walls of their shelter. The tent, once a symbol of safety and camaraderie, now felt like a fragile cocoon, barely holding back the encroaching darkness and the unseen terrors that lurked within it. Igor Dyatlov sat at the center of the group, his face illuminated by the flickering light of a single kerosene lamp. His usual calm demeanor was strained, his sharp eyes darting nervously toward the tent's entrance. The strange orange light they had seen earlier that day still burned in his mind, a haunting image that refused to fade. He had tried to rationalize it, a trick of the atmosphere perhaps, or the reflection of the moon on the snow, but deep down, he knew it was something else, something unnatural. Zinaida Kolmogorova sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. She was usually the one to lift the group's spirits, but even her boundless optimism had been eroded by the oppressive atmosphere. "Do you think it's still out there?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. No one answered. The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken, as the group exchanged uneasy glances. Yuri Doroshenko, ever the optimist, tried to lighten the mood. "It's probably just the wind," he said, his voice forcedly cheerful. "Or maybe some animal, nothing to worry about." But even as he spoke, his eyes betrayed his fear, darting toward the tent's entrance, as if expecting something to burst through at any moment. Ludmila Dubinina, sitting cross-legged near the back of the tent, was unusually quiet. Her sharp eyes scanned the group, taking in their fear and uncertainty. She had always been the most pragmatic of the group, the one who could be relied upon to keep a level head in a crisis. But even she was struggling to maintain her composure. The strange noises they had heard earlier, the growls, the screams, were unlike anything she had ever encountered in the wilderness. And the orange light, it defied explanation. Ustem Slobodin, the group's philosopher, sat with his back against the tent wall, his eyes closed as if in deep meditation. But his furrowed brow and clenched fists betrayed his inner turmoil. "The mountains are alive," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "They have a way of revealing the truth, whether we are ready for it or not." His words sent a shiver through the group, their meaning sinking in like a knife. Nikolai Thibault Brunello, usually the most adventurous and fearless of the group, was uncharacteristically subdued. He sat hunched over, his arms wrapped around his knees, his eyes fixed on the ground. "We should have turned back," he muttered, his voice thick with regret. "We should have known better." Alexander Kalavatov, the quiet problem solver, was the only one who seemed to be thinking clearly. He had been quietly assessing their situation, his sharp mind working through the possibilities. "We need to stay calm," he said, his voice steady. "Panicking won't help us. We need to focus on survival." Yuri Krivonishenko, the youngest and most light-hearted of the group, was visibly shaken. His usual humor had vanished, replaced by a palpable fear. "What if it's not an animal?" he asked, his voice trembling. "What if it's something else?" Semyon Zolotaryov, the oldest and most enigmatic member of the group, sat apart from the others, his eyes fixed on the tent's entrance. He had been unusually quiet since they had seen the orange light, his expression unreadable. "The mountains are not to be underestimated," he said finally, his voice low and gravelly. "They have a way of revealing the truth, whether we are ready for it or not." The group fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them like a shroud. The wind outside seemed to grow louder, more insistent, as if mocking their fear. And then, just as the tension in the tent reached its breaking point, they heard it, a sound that made their blood run cold. It started as a low, guttural growl, barely audible over the wind, but as it grew louder, more distinct, the group realized it was not coming from outside the tent. It was coming from within. Igor's eyes widened in horror as he turned toward the source of the sound. The kerosene lamp flickered, casting eerie shadows on the tent walls, and then, with a sudden, deafening roar, the tent was torn open from the inside, the fabric ripping apart as if it were paper. Chaos erupted, the group scrambled to their feet, their screams drowned out by the howling wind and the unearthly growls that filled the air. In their panic, they grabbed whatever they could, boots, jackets, knives, and fled into the freezing darkness, their minds consumed by a single primal instinct: survival. The snow was blinding, the wind cutting through their inadequate clothing like a knife. They stumbled through the darkness, their breath coming in ragged gasps, their hearts pounding in their chests. Behind them, the growls grew louder, more frenzied, as if whatever had torn open the tent was now in pursuit. Igor tried to rally the group, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Stay together," he shouted, his words swallowed by the storm. But it was no use. The group was scattered, their fear driving them in different directions. Zainaida stumbled and fell, her hands sinking into the snow as she struggled to get back up. Yuri Doroshenko reached out to help her, but a sudden, deafening roar sent him scrambling backward in terror. Ludmila Dubinina, ever the pragmatist, tried to keep her wits about her. She knew they needed shelter, and fast. But the snow was too deep, the wind too fierce. She could barely see more than a few feet in front of her. And then through the blinding snow, she saw it. A faint, flickering light in the distance. The orange light. "Over there," she shouted, her voice hoarse from the cold. "Follow me." She began to run toward the light, her heart pounding in her chest. The others followed, their fear and desperation driving them forward. But as they drew closer, the light began to pulse, growing brighter and more intense until it was almost blinding. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The group stopped in their tracks, their breath coming in ragged gasps, their eyes wide with terror. The wind howled around them, the snow falling in thick, heavy flakes, and then from somewhere in the darkness came a sound that made their blood run cold. A low, guttural growl, followed by a scream that was unmistakably human. Igor's heart sank as he realized what had happened. They were being hunted, and whatever was out there, it was picking them off one by one. The night stretched on, an endless nightmare of cold and fear. The group was scattered, their screams echoing through the mountains as they were pursued by an unseen predator. Some tried to fight back, their knives flashing in the darkness, but it was no use. The thing, whatever it was too fast. Too strong. By the time the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the mountain was silent once more. The snow had covered most of the evidence of the night's horrors, but the truth was there, buried beneath the surface. The Dyatlov Pass had claimed its victims, and the mystery of what had happened that night would haunt the world for decades to come. But as the sun rose over the Ural Mountains, casting its pale light over the snow-covered landscape, one question remained unanswered. What had they seen? What had they heard? And what had driven them to flee into the freezing darkness, to their deaths? The answers, if they existed at all, were buried deep within the heart of the mountains, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to uncover them.
The first light of dawn crept over the Ural Mountains, casting a pale, ghostly glow across the snow-covered landscape. The wind had died down, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The mountain pass, once alive with the sounds of laughter and camaraderie, now lay still and lifeless, a frozen tomb for the 9 hikers who had ventured into its depths. The tent, torn open from the inside, flapped weakly in the breeze, its fabric stained with frost and fear. Footprints, some deep and frantic, others shallow and dragging, led away from the campsite, disappearing into the vast white expanse. But there was no sign of the hikers, not yet. Weeks passed before the first search party arrived, their arrival delayed by the relentless winter storms that had battered the region. The team, a mix of seasoned rescuers and local volunteers, moved cautiously through the snow, their eyes scanning the ground for any sign of the missing hikers. The atmosphere was tense, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them like a physical force. They had heard the rumors, of course, the whispers of strange lights and unearthly screams, but they were practical men and women, trained to focus on the facts. Yet as they approached the abandoned campsite, even the most hardened among them felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. The tent was the first clue, its tattered remains a stark contrast to the pristine snow around it. The rescuers exchanged uneasy glances as they examined the scene. The fabric had been torn open from the inside, the edges jagged and uneven, as if something or someone had clawed their way out in a desperate frenzy. Inside, the hikers' belongings lay scattered and abandoned. Boots, jackets, food supplies, even a diary, its pages frozen and brittle. The rescuers picked through the items, their unease growing with each passing moment. It was clear that the hikers had left in a hurry, but why? What could have driven them to flee into the freezing darkness, inadequately dressed and unprepared for the harsh conditions? The answer came soon enough. A few hundred meters from the campsite, the rescuers found the first body. Yuri Doroshenko lay face down in the snow, his arms outstretched as if reaching for something or someone. His face was frozen in a mask of terror, his eyes wide and unseeing. His clothing was torn, his skin marred by strange, unexplained injuries. The rescuers exchanged grim looks as they examined the body, their minds racing with questions. What had happened here? What could have caused such injuries? The discovery of Yuri's body was only the beginning. Over the next few days, the rescuers found the rest of the hikers, their bodies scattered across the mountain pass in various states of disarray. Zenaida Kolmogorova and Rustem Slobodin were found together, their bodies partially buried in the snow. Zenaida's face was frozen in a look of sheer terror, her hands clutching at Rustem's jacket as if seeking comfort in her final moments. Rustem, ever the philosopher, had died with his eyes closed, his expression eerily peaceful, as if he had accepted his fate. Ludmila Duvanina and Alexander Kolovatov were discovered near a small grove of trees, their bodies locked in a final, desperate embrace. Ludmila's face was a mask of pain, her lips pulled back in a silent scream. Alexander's body bore the brunt of the injuries, his skull fractured and his ribs crushed, as if he had been struck by an immense force. The rescuers could only stare in horror, their minds struggling to comprehend the brutality of the scene. Nikolai Thibault Brignol was found further down the slope, his body partially buried in the snow. His face was frozen in a look of shock, his eyes wide and unseeing. His injuries were even more severe than Alexander's, his skull shattered and his chest caved in. The rescuers exchanged uneasy glances as they examined the body, their minds racing with questions. What could have caused such injuries, and why had the hikers fled into the freezing darkness, only to meet such a gruesome end? The final discovery was the most chilling of all. Igor Dyatlov, the group's leader, was found near the base of a large cedar tree, his body partially covered in snow. His face was frozen in a look of grim determination, his eyes fixed on the horizon, as if searching for answers. His injuries were the most severe of all, his skull fractured and his ribs crushed, as if he had been struck by an immense force. But it was the expression on his face that haunted the rescuers the most. A look of sheer, unrelenting terror, as if he had seen something beyond comprehension. As the rescuers gathered the bodies and prepared to transport them back to civilization, the questions began to mount. What had happened on that fateful night? What had driven the hikers to flee their tent in such a panic? And what had caused the strange, unexplained injuries that marred their bodies? The official investigation provided few answers. The hikers' deaths were attributed to a compelling natural force, but the explanation did little to quell the growing sense of unease. The injuries were too severe, too bizarre to be explained by natural causes. And then, there were the rumors. The whispers of strange lights and unearthly screams, the reports of an orange glow in the sky, the tales of a mysterious figure seen lurking in the shadows. Theories began to circulate, each more outlandish than the last. Some claimed the hikers had been attacked by a Yeti, a mythical creature said to inhabit the Ural Mountains. Others suggested they had stumbled upon a secret military experiment, their deaths the result of a government cover-up. Still others believed they had encountered something far more sinister, an extraterrestrial presence, drawn to the remote mountain pass by forces beyond human understanding. But as the years passed and the mystery deepened, one question remained unanswered. What had the hikers seen? What had driven them to flee into the freezing darkness, to their deaths? The answers, if they existed at all, were buried deep within the heart of the mountains, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to uncover them. And so, the Dyatlov Pass Incident became more than just a tragedy. It became a legend, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires and debated in hushed tones. The mountain pass, once a place of beauty and adventure, was now shrouded in mystery and fear, its secrets locked away in the frozen embrace of the Ural Mountains. And as the world moved on, the memory of the 9 hikers who had ventured into its depths faded into obscurity, their story a haunting reminder of the unknown dangers that lurk in the wild, untamed corners of the earth. But for those who dared to seek the truth, the mystery of the Dyatlov Pass remained, a tantalizing enigma that defied explanation. And as the years turned into decades, the legend grew, fueled by the whispers of strange lights and unearthly screams, the reports of an orange glow in the sky, the tales of a mysterious figure seen lurking in the shadows. The Dyatlov Pass incident was no longer just a story. It was a mystery, a riddle wrapped in ice and snow, and the answers, if they existed at all, were buried deep within the heart of the mountains, waiting for someone brave, or foolish, enough to uncover them.